Welcome to EnergyX Ventures, the show where we discuss with energy innovators, entrepreneurs, and seasoned industry veterans about the latest trends in the energy sector. Today, it's my great pleasure to have Bart Boesmans as my guest on the show. Bart does not only have 3 decades of experience in the energy sector, he was a pioneer of the renewable energy space, but he is also today the Chief Technology Officer of ACWA Power. I'm very much looking forward to discuss Bart's view on the energy transition and his personal journey. Bart, it's amazing to have you here. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, Pierre.
So before we go into the questions, what brought you into the energy sector? What were the stations that you had in your journey to ultimately come to the position that you are in right now?
Well, it's interesting if I look back myself because actually it all started when I was 18 years old in high school. You know, ending high school, you had to do this project work, and I chose at the time to do my project on the topic. I remember the title was renewable energy.
That was very future.
And it has been a constant theme throughout my career. I started studying engineering, did my PhD work, and then really started working 20 years ago. I've been lucky enough to be in the middle of the wind energy development boom in Europe, developing my first wind projects. 10 years ago, I was in a research environment, developing large pilot projects for smart grids and demand-side management and decentralized generation. 5 years ago, I was in Africa doing solar CSP projects and also, interesting enough, these small-scale microgrid projects for energy access. And now I'm actually very happy working for ACWA Power, who is a leading developer in this field in the Middle East and emerging economies, really extremely successful over the past 15 years in the water business, water desalination and power generation, and in renewable energy, and really being recognized as the cost leader. We're leading the cost curve. Huh? Yeah. So renewable energy, throughout these different functions, renewable energy or energy transition technologies have been always the constant theme in everything I did. I've been working in engineering and research and operations, even in strategy, but always about energy transition technologies. I think I can say it's my passion, one of my passions. It's my professional passion. And you know, it has been evolving so tremendously over that period. The field of energy transition and technologies, I remember well when we did our first wind project, say 20 years ago, the questions you got were always about the reliability of the technology. Will it work?
Mm-hmm.
Huh? Will it be safe? Will there not be too many disturbances to the grid? Huh? Will the power quality be okay? Sometimes will these blades of the wind turbines come off and create accidents?
Yeah.
All about reliability. And that was quickly solved. But then, let's say 10 years ago, the question was always about, isn't it going to be too expensive? Well, the cost, subsidies which are needed. Can it survive? Can the countries afford to pay for renewable energy? And now, and I'm really happy with it, the question is, how fast can we go to 100% renewables?
Indeed, yeah.
It's not about reliability anymore. It's not about cost anymore. So now we're really at a place in time where energy transition technologies, for me, they really have become sustainable. So sustainability within this idea of having to meet environmental criteria, but also affordability criteria, cost, and reliability criteria, reliability of supply. The energy transition becomes possible because we meet all three of them with the underlying technologies. And that's the big driver. All of this, of course, a lot has been influenced by policy. Policy frameworks have been created to allow this technology development. but also let's not underestimate the huge impact of the development of technology. It's not only scale-up of an industry, there has always also been a constant flow, year after year, of technology breakthroughs and incremental improvements of technologies, which always have increased reliability, improved environmental impact, and most importantly, reduced the cost.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. An impressive journey, in particular over the last 10 years where we see prices go. But coming back to your CV, I mean, that's also really impressive to see that there was a constant red line, basically, of working on the energy transition. It seems like you were really one of the pioneers in developing this technology. If that was, what did you say, like 15 years ago or 18 years ago was your first wind project?
It is correct. At least it was at the time. I think there were pioneers before, but at least it was at the time when many of the big thinkers in the industry, and even the leaders in the industry, were not all convinced about the future of technology and the energy landscape and about the transition. And I do believe indeed that at the time you needed visionaries at all levels. And those who have a good track record in the field right now, those who have a position in the field right now, and I include ACWA Power amongst them, it's the result of courageous choices and a vision about the future and a willingness to really focus on technologies which have not only a positive future, but also a positive impact on the future.
Now, the solar price dropped significantly over the past years. Where do you see this going? Are we reaching close to zero at one point in time?
Well, I think you need to distinguish the short term and the medium term. So on the short term, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some slowdown of the recent price decreases, because there's always certain balance between supply and demand in actually the modules, and could well be that we are actually in a period with a slowdown of the decreases of the price. But more fundamentally, on the medium term, it can only decrease, and it will continue to decrease, because the underlying fundamentals are such that there is still room to improve. And I believe the most important reason, if you look at it right now, is that right now, in a solar project, the modules, they represent already less than half. They used to represent almost all of the cost. 80% of the cost of a project would be your modules, and then a little bit around it. Now, your modules will represent less than half of the cost. Everything else is balance of system. And the balance of system, the cost of the balance of system can be significantly reduced if you increase the efficiency of your modules. And increasing efficiency of the modules is basically what the industry is doing year after year. And new technologies are being prepared in the labs, in the research labs, and by the manufacturers. And they will be rolled out one after the other. So you will have heterojunction technologies coming in. You will, at some point in the near future, you will have tandem technologies combining two different layers to further increase the efficiency. So basically, that combined with further scale advantages in the industry makes me believe that the trend is fundamental. And the cost, the investment cost will go down. Will continue to go down. So there will be a downward pressure on levelized cost of electricity. Of course, at some point you need to consider also system costs. It becomes, there's a certain cost associated to integrating a technology into the system, but even those costs will be going down, because we also have technologies for system integration.
How do you see the decentral solar development?
There was a time when many people in the industry would think that solar would all become decentralized. And solar was like really the emblematic. Solar was everyone's solar on the rooftop, and you don't need centralized power generation anymore. Mm-hmm. It's not what we're seeing now. Of course, there's a huge development and big application of decentralized solar, and definitely that is part of the overall solution for the energy needs of our different societies. But clearly also in developing economies, growing economies with growing energy needs, there's also a lot of room for centralized projects. And of course, you also see that it's on the large projects that the lowest costs can be achieved. And there still is a big difference between the cost of decentralized solar and the cost of centralized solar. So I'm absolutely convinced that we will even see more centralized and large gigascale projects than we saw until now. Even in places which are very mature systems, like in Europe, like in the US, you see more and more large-scale projects being integrated in the system and actually starting to replace the former large fossil fuel-fired stations.
So one of the key challenges of our energy transition is the integration of all of this into a stable system. How do you see the development in that area?
You're quite right. It's, I think, the essential question for the next 10 years. It will all be about integration. So all of these technologies, and by the way, not only solar. We see solar and wind as very important. They are complementary to some extent because of their profiles. The variability of the profile of wind is very different from the variability, the daily cycle of solar. So all studies indicate, all evidence indicate that you better have both of them in your system than only one of them. But this being said, of course, a challenge of integration remains. And the challenge of integration is actually a challenge related to the flexibility needs in the system. Without wanting to become too technical, in the power system, you need to manage the balance between what you produce and what you consume. And that means in practice, because you cannot completely control consumption, that you have to be able to adapt what you produce. And that is easy to do with an old conventional thermal power plant. That is much more difficult to do with renewables because you do not always have the resource available. And that's why we need system integration. We need to bring additional flexibility to the system. So where can the flexibility come from? It can come from actually quite a few different sources. One of them is indeed existing or new thermal plants. Yeah? That is often, if it exists, the cheapest way to provide flexibility to the system. Where it exists, it will be used. Second is storage. There's a huge development in storage technologies ongoing, and we see everywhere huge potential, also huge need for different storage technologies to be integrated into the system to bring exactly this kind of flexibility. Third is interconnections. The more you interconnect countries, the more you interconnect regions, the easier it becomes to absorb the variability and to provide flexibility to the system. So we can only encourage countries, system operators to interconnect their systems. The fourth, and not to be underestimated, is demand-side management. We've always lived in the idea that the production needs to adapt to the demand and that when you hit the button, you get electricity. But we may have to revisit the paradigm and to also adapt the consumption, the actual consumption to whether or not electricity is easily available. I've done, some time ago, we did an extremely interesting project. We built a completely renewable microgrid in Antarctica. You cannot be any further away from the grid than that. And the only way to make it work is to make the users of the station we powered over there, to make the users actively adapt their consumption behavior in function of whether or not you have sufficient electricity in the storage. I'm not saying we have to go that far in our countries, our economies, but what we can do is start introducing the concept that at some times electricity is abundantly available and at other times it is not. And therefore start influencing the demand, orienting the demand to those periods in which electricity is mostly abundantly available. And the fifth element is actually curtailing your renewable energy. There's nothing wrong. If prices are very low, you can also accept to curtail, to limit your production. So we have many elements, and I really think a central one, which fortunately is developing very well and very quickly. A central one is storage technology. So energy storage. It's about batteries, but not only batteries. Of course, we see a lot of development in batteries, and very quickly we are doing several projects which are actually integrated, which use solar and wind and batteries, or solar and batteries, to be able to meet a certain profile required for a certain application. So that's already ongoing. We will see more of this, and there's a very interesting innovation landscape evolving around storage technologies. Batteries, flow batteries, heat storage to be used for storing electricity, cryogenic storage, underground compressed air storage, gravity-based storage. Many startups are working in this field. It's very dynamic, and I do see in such a landscape there will be also a fairly quick adoption.
Interesting. And coming back to the demand side angle, because that's something that I find really interesting, because it really also tackles how to influence behavior of people. And in one of the first episodes of this series, we actually had a startup called Viso, which is actually exactly focusing on nudging, using certain behavioral techniques to nudge consumers to consume less. So in this project that you described very far in the Antarctica, how did you end up influencing consumers to adapt rather to the curve?
Yeah, the real challenge is influencing consumers to adapt less and at the right time. And the only real way to get there is by creating price signals. And these can be real price signals if you have a market where you have time of use prices, and that's up to the regulator to create such a market. Or it can be normative prices, it can be fixtures prices, which reflect nevertheless the time periods during which it is more interesting for the system that consumption would occur. It is not at all difficult to give an economical dimension to it. Already right now, many industries, they have contracts in which they accept to be cut off for certain parts of their demands against a certain compensation. Already now, grid operators use this as a way more for security than for balancing their renewable generation, but it is known, the contractual mechanisms for it exist and are actually not too difficult to implement. So we will see demand-side management also as a way, demand response, I should call it, demand response, active demand-side management, real time. We will see it as one of the ways to move to integration. Now, to make the story complete, if you allow me, Pierre, when we talk about integration, it would be wrong to only talk about the electricity system. We talk about renewables, integration in the electricity system. The challenge is there, but part of the solution lies in coupling the electricity system with other energy systems. So we also have hydrogen. We have the possibility to produce green gases, starting from green electricity. And that is actually a sector coupling, is a very good way to cope with the problem of variable sources in the electricity system. And by the way, we solve one problem for the electricity system, but we also need this to really contribute to deep decarbonization. If we really want to go all the way in the energy transition, we cannot do everything with electricity only, as you well know. Electrification will contribute a lot to the energy transition, but we cannot do everything with electricity only. There are hard-to-abate sectors in industry, certain parts of transport, which you can never reasonably decarbonate completely or deeply with electricity only. There we will need green fuels. And the green hydrogen produced with renewable electricity and other green fuels from other sources will really be the answer to this. And once we have green fuels, these same green fuels can be used in the few remaining, and now we're talking not about 2030, but maybe about 2050, these green fuels can, in my view, easily be used in the remaining conventional power stations to provide the emergency, the backup power, which might be needed if your renewable sources and your storage and everything would still not be sufficient to make sure that electricity is available. So it all fits together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, ACWA Power is already involved in that field of the future, green hydrogen. Maybe you can share a few words about the let's say, flagship project of our region in NEOM.
Yes, we're very actively involved. We're working on one of the leading projects, which is a huge project. It is done not only in the NEOM region, but it is developed in collaboration with NEOM and with Air Products. It is, I believe, exceptional as a project in the sense that it is not a pilot project. You know, ACWA Power has been successful in leading the cost curve by very quickly going to large scale. There has often been in the industry a tendency to go step by step and work very long in small scale pilots. And this approach makes sense if the underlying technology itself doesn't exist yet, and you need to fine tune it, you need to optimize it, you need to develop the technology. Then you do a small scale pilot. But in green hydrogen, so basically electrolysis on the basis of wind and solar generated electricity, this technology exists. At least the electrolyzers which will be used, they exist for more than 100 years as a basis, this technology, and it is being used in other sectors as well. And in this particular project, the NEOM project, the end product will not just be hydrogen to be used locally, but will also be ammonia, which can be transported to other places in the world as a carrier for the hydrogen and for the energy, in order to either use the ammonia directly as a fuel or to regenerate hydrogen at other places in Europe or Asia, wherever the market exists. And also this technology for converting hydrogen to ammonia exists. So our view is that by going at scale, it is possible to rapidly drive down the cost. And we believe this is by all means a pioneering project, a leading project, but we're on a very good track to reach the objectives.
Very, very interesting. What are the biggest innovation topics that you see that you have on the radar from a developer point of view next to hydrogen?
Yeah, you know very well how innovation works. We have an innovation roadmap with at least 6 categories of technologies, and within each category, 5-6 topics we really want to focus on. And we only focus on relatively near-term technologies, say 5 years ahead, with market entry 5 years ahead. Then we really start to co-develop and work on them. And so the way it works is not by too early picking the winner technologies. Sometimes you have to have many balloons, and some of them will go up very high, and others will not go very far. And you cannot afford, I believe, to just pick one of those technologies. We try to interact with a wide ecosystem of startups, evaluating, even testing different of these technologies. But certainly, if I can talk about a few larger categories, there's a lot of room in storage. So we're really working on innovative storage technologies. Of course, we will see batteries, and we will see further development of batteries, but there are a lot of other things happening in the storage landscape, which is of big interest to us. Then, of course, we see everything related to the use of digital within our digital technologies within the energy sector, which are transformative. It's not just about making good use of the data, which in itself is already important, but it's also really optimizing the operations of the assets. We're talking about massive data accumulation through IoT. We're talking about using artificial intelligence to go through your data. We're talking about applying robotics in order to limit the amount of manpower you really need on often remote locations and very dispersed sites. So lots of things happening, and all of that is important because this, coming back to this cost leadership and to the need, well, to drive down the cost to facilitate the energy transition, it's not just about the price of the equipment you buy. It is also about the operation and maintenance cost, about the lifetime, how you manage it, how you operate it, all the costs around it. If you really want to drive down cost, you need to work on every single element. That's what ACWA Power has always been doing. That's what we have to do here in these technologies.
So if you look forward like 15 years from now, how would the energy landscape have changed compared to now?
I think we really will see three things and maybe a fourth one, but that would be different between different parts of the world. And I have already touched about on all of them, but let's take this as a bit of a summary. First, I think we will see massively wind and solar, not only solar. We will also see many other renewable technologies, but more in niche applications or in specific markets. But what we will see almost everywhere and taking the lion's share of the development in renewables is solar PV, I should say, PV and CSP, and wind onshore and offshore. No? Then I'm also convinced that by that time we will see very significant amounts, maybe up to 10% of installed generation capacity, maybe more, of medium-term storage. I mean, not storage for storing your energy during 1 hour, but storing it for between 4 and 8 hours at the end to cover a daily cycle. Yeah? Medium-term storage could be of different types. Then I'm convinced that by then we will see massive hydrogen from electrolyzers appearing in our markets and being used for sector coupling, and also therefore being used to produce electricity when needed. But mainly going to industrial uses in very hard to abate sectors. And the fourth element, and it may be a bit different depending on where you are in the world. The fourth element is about the decentralization, which is a fundamental trend, but it is especially a fundamental trend in those parts of the world where the energy needs are not strongly growing anymore. And I think there could be kind of a bifurcation, kind of a different evolution. There are parts of the world where the energy needs, due to less economical growth, are actually decreasing. Energy efficiency is decreasing further, and all of that is important. And there will be somewhat larger room for demand-side management, demand response at the individual level, and also local generation at the individual level. You would see many houses, many consumers actually being prosumers, even at the individual level. I think in the rest of the world, the economies which are still strongly growing, and therefore even when you apply energy efficiency measures will still have growing energy needs, you will first see a further deployment of the most sustainable energy technologies in a central way, because it's the most cost-effective way. If you still need to invest in new capacity, you better use your money where it is most cost-effective, and today it is centralized. So it will change. It will change quite a lot from what we have known, but it doesn't mean that the thermal technologies we know right now will have disappeared by then. Let's be clear. This transition is a transition that needs to be gradual, because at all times we need to keep the system stable and reliable and supply all the customers and all the needs. Once someone compared it, and I like the comparison, what we're doing is like changing the control system of a passenger plane from an analog hydraulic system to a digital electronic system in full flight with passengers on board. It's an image, but it's a bit what we're doing. We're changing profoundly the underlying technologies and how we operate them, while keeping the system live, stable, safe, reliable, and making sure that we do not go from blackout to blackout. That's what we have been doing, and that's what we will continue to do. We have to.
Yeah. Indeed, we can't stop. We cannot land, to come back to your analogy. Great. So, yeah, I think our industry will continue to be very exciting for decades ahead. So I think that's really good news for also people that are maybe just finishing their university, that want to maybe get involved in the energy transition. So last question, what is your advice for young talent that wants to get involved in the energy transition? How should they start?
That's a good question. First, I think everyone who wants to contribute to the energy transition can contribute, because you also have an individual responsibility. We're all consumers of energy, and we all have choices to make in the way we consume, how much we consume, the way we consume, whether we take a plane or not. So there's a part of individual responsibility in all this as well. But beyond that, the industry needs a lot of resources. I think one of the energy transition is going to happen, I believe, because now the costs, the environmental, the reliability elements, they all fit together, and it is going to happen. The train is rolling, it's not going to stop. But it can go quickly or slow, and that depends on several factors. And one of the limiting factors could well be the availability of talent. This is hugely mobilizing resources, human resources, and we need And we need the best and the brightest to contribute to this. And honestly, it's not only anymore in research and development. It's not only technology anymore. It's about doing projects on the ground. It's about building these things, operating these plants, conceiving, building, and operating these plants. So if you're an engineering professional or a financial professional or a legal professional, because all of this is needed to make these projects work and successful, I think there's a huge demand. So the only thing I can really suggest is dive into it with a good professional background, either in engineering or in finance or in legal or in stakeholder management, all of the skills which are needed to successfully develop, build, and operate projects. And then go to one of those many companies who are active in the field, because we're looking for the very best. And that's where it's happening right now. It's not happening in research labs anymore. It's happening on the field. It's in the desert in the kingdom. It's in many other places across the world. But that is where the change is being made.
Great. Thank you, Bart. I think that were amazing words to close our conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think it was really interesting to hear your views on how the energy transition will evolve in the future. And thank you for the insights into what you have been doing. And looking forward to have you maybe a few episodes down the road and check back in.
Very good. Look forward to it. Thank you as well.